Welcome to Investing with Mackie, where my goal is to use charts and graphs to help visualize option choices so you can try to make the best decision for what you want. In today's video, I'm going to look at options and theta and delta. Now, what we have here is a website that I made that helps me to visualize these. So right now we can see here, this is some data pulled from Thursday after close. We have a price after close that was 424.07 on SPY. And here's all the options. So we can scroll down. And we can see basically, right, the further out the strikes go, the more expensive they tend to get. So this is kind of a range of price plus or minus the current price. And I think this is really cool is we can see as we go further out in time, right, further strikes, we can see that increase in price. The opposite of that is a decrease in price as you get closer to strike. And that's really where this concept of theta comes in. So if you've heard of theta gain, or, options losing price over time and selling options is the best way to make money, this is kind of where we can see that. So we'll scroll down and I've got a little table here that kind of highlights that theta. So we can see as you go further out, it's very narrow. And then as you get closer to the left side or closer to expiration, we can see it starts to widen out. So a lot of times you'll hear you want to trade, 45 days out for selling options or so on and so forth. But ultimately, you're going to choose your own goal as options are fairly priced as long as there's sufficient volume. So what we can see here, which I think is pretty cool, is we'll say let's go out to January. So that gives us a couple months of data. And then we'll kind of zoom in on the y-axis. And we can see how if you go out a couple months, the theta is pretty steady. So what we're seeing here is each strike is the values vertically. So at the top you've got 445 all the way down to 410 on the bottom there. And then the number in the box is essentially the daily decrease in price. That's the theta that we're seeing here. So the theta is pretty steady far out, but as you approach close, you start to see an increase in theta. Now, as we get close, because options that are out of the money tend to be cheaper, they're going to have less theta to get you down to zero. Whereas options that are closer to being in the money, those are going to have a lot more loss if they turn out not to being in the money. So that's essentially what we're seeing here. So with something like this, we can look at this and see, well, my goal is to make X amount of money per day, and you can use theta to do that. So if you use something like a vertical spread, you could pick two values and then use that difference to determine how much you could make per day. So if we look at this right now, say October 16th strike, this number on the bottom of the chart, and we were to say sell a vertical spread of the 439 and 440, right? So dollar vertical spread, we're essentially able to make 1.1 cents per day, or equivalent on 100 shares, basically $1 a day on 100 shares. So due to theta on that vertical spread, at this point in time, it ends up being $1-ish per day. Now as we move closer to expiration, using that same 440 and 439, we can see how that changes, right? So we're still doing pretty good there. 1.1. And then we see as we get really close to expiration, it decreases significantly, and now about 0.7. And 440, 439, looks like maybe lost some data there, but it starts to lose significantly less. So we can kind of look at the chart and figure out where the optimal entry point is based on theta in order to get our max returns. So generally the closer to expiration, the faster that happens, but it depends which options you're trading and the space between those. So as I've kind of looked at it, it appears to me that about 2 weeks out is kind of your ideal point, right? So if we look here, October 5th is when we pulled the data. So 2 weeks out would be approximately October 29th, right? We had 14 days. Or sorry, October 19th. And that puts us right about here. And that's where we can start to see everything tends to trend down. So the further out you go, right, the more steady that theta is, and you can consistently earn those values by looking at what you're trying to accomplish. Now, that all being said, what do you lose by trading closer to expiration? Well, that is where the idea of delta comes in. So if we look at this other chart we have here, we can see that delta for these same range of prices, right, is fairly narrow in the future, which means every dollar of change in the underlying changes a pretty steady amount in the actual options price. But as we get close to expiration, so once again, we're kind of the same time frame, maybe January to now, we can start to see how it gets wider and wider, right, approaching 1 and 0. So if we look at this, the 1 values happen to be the ones that are in the money, right? As you move down to the 0.5, those are at the money, and then down to the 0, those would be the ones that would be significantly out of the money. And there's so many values here, we're chopping some off. But we can see that progression, right? 406 is the top value seen here, down to 223, getting us down to about 5.7 on the delta. If we recall, when this was pulled, right, we're looking at about 424 for the current price of the underlying. So that makes sense, right? In the money or at the money is about a 0.5. So as we can see here, the closer to expiration we get, we're going to have more swings in your option price. And that just happens to be because there's less future value that you're holding in that option. But you can visualize it here by looking at this delta picture. I think I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. But if there's any questions you have or anything else you'd like to see, let me know in future videos. I plan to create more charts, more images to help you try to make a decision on investments you might like to use. This website, I'll include the link in the description below. It is priceprobability.com. I don't pull the data that often. I'm looking to maybe set that up to be automated, but I do have some other symbols of data you can see. If we look at something like Amazon, because there's less options, the data is a little more clear, right? You can see the prices coming down. Let's look at the calls. And you can see that narrow delta increasing as you approach expiration. And that theta, like we said, a few weeks out, right? You can see it starts to increase. And then October 27th, that's kind of where that theta peaks. And then from there, kind of depends whether you're in the money or out of the money, where the theta goes from there, or how far out of the money you are. So hopefully you enjoy the video. If you do, go ahead and subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and I look forward to making more content like this to help you understand your investments and maybe create some tools available to you to help you make those decisions.